All right, I know it is late in the month, but I need to do my April book recap. And so here we are. We're going to talk about some books we read in April. I mean, me, I read these books. And if you like books and if you read a bunch of books, I'd like to know what you're reading as well. So leave a comment down below. If you find any of the books that I talked about in this interesting, I'm going to include some links in the description and you can go and get those. And some of these links will be affiliate links. And so, that might help me out a little bit. I've never really made any money off of affiliate links. So let's see what we can do together. So April was a busy month for me, but I still managed to get a good amount of reading done in a combination of print, digital, and audio books. And all of these are reading. So if anybody tells you otherwise, they're bullies. They're mean, and I don't want to be mean. So the first book that I finished, it's called The Fourth Turning: What Cycles of History Tell Us About America's Next Rendezvous with Destiny. This book was written in 1997. And the authors, William Strauss and Neil Howe, in this project, they are looking at history and generational cycles and looking at ups and downs in history and how these different cycles may actually be something that we can chart out and look to the future to see what we could expect. And I saw that the follow-up book, The Fourth Turning Is Here, came out recently, and it was at Barnes & Noble, and I was like, oh, I should read the first ones first. And so this book kind of freaked me out a little bit. They talked about how in the early 2000s that we should expect some kind of cataclysmic events of different sorts. It talked about terrorism, talked about economic challenges, and it said around 2025 there should be some kind of fourth turning event that our nation will have to kind of figure out which direction do we want to go down. So kind of spooky. And so it was interesting. It's very thick. There's a lot going on here, but they really do chart out different eras and different generations based on 4 different generational types, and how every 80 years essentially these types cycle through and lead to a fourth turning, and looking at American history and European history in particular. And so it was an interesting read. I'd recommend it if you like history and you want to, if you think that there are possibilities of cycles that happen and repeat over and over, then this is a worthwhile read. It took a while for me to get through it. So follow up with that, then I listened to The Fourth Turning Is Here, and William Strauss has passed away, and so Neil Howe wrote this, and that was a follow-up that focused more on how to actually prepare for that fourth turning event, knowing that we are facing a lot of the challenges that Strauss and Howe talked about in their first book. So it was really interesting. Are they going to be 100% right all the time? No. They're not trying to come at this from any kind of spiritual or religious perspective. They are just looking at history and generations and how these kinds of events cycle throughout time. So it was an interesting read. So then I'll just keep with my nonfiction reads. I also read Fear and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard. I am trying to read more philosophical works and classical works, and so this is Kierkegaard looking at the story of Abraham offering Isaac to the Lord, and the faith that it took Abraham to do this, knowing that Isaac was the beloved child, the promised child, but he had faith to believe that God could bring him back somehow. And so it's a horrifying story when you think about it. As a father, I don't know how I would react in that situation. And so Kierkegaard is looking at what is faith, and how do we know that how can we know that we know? And so this is a book that I'm going to have to take some time with and reflect on. But one of the things that is a theme here, is that there is a moment where we have to take the leap of faith, where all of the rationality and all of the logic, those paths will run out. And if we want to keep moving forward, then we will have to step out in faith. And faith is not something that we can stand still in, but we must keep moving. And so, so this was my first Kierkegaard text. I chose it because it was short. I'm not gonna lie, it was a short book, and I enjoy the way he writes, and definitely I had to slow down and reflect deeper on what he was saying, which was helpful for me. Maybe someday I'll do a deeper dive and more reflection on this, but I'm just going to do my overview stuff here today. I also read in April a book called Future Church, which is 7 Laws of Real Church Growth. And this is by Will Mancini. And he is looking, and in this book, he's looking at kind of the different models of church, and looking at the attractional church and the missional church, and how sometimes those are two different things that people try to put to work in. What Mancini seems to be arguing is that those can actually work together, but instead of being on two different planes or two different environments or arenas or models, he's trying to argue that if we want to have an attraction in our churches, then we also need to have a strong mission emphasis. And the mission is not just tell people about Jesus. The mission is make disciples. And so if we're making disciples as what he calls the upper room, then the lower room, which is the attractional element of the church, will have the necessary ingredients to reach people, to connect with people, and knowing that it is powered by things like prayer and understanding of God's word and intentional disciple making is what is going to power the attractional methods of the church and helping people come into places where they can hear the gospel and receive the good news. And so this was a staff read. It's something that we are going to be talking about in just a few days as a church staff. But it was good. I enjoyed the book, and I would recommend reading it. And this was actually a book that was recommended to me by my father-in-law. And so Future Church by Will Mancini. The next nonfiction is a text that was written by a friend of mine. His name is Jeffrey Portmann. It's called Delayed Destiny: Embracing Slow Motion Growth in a Fast-Paced World. And Jeffrey Portmann is one of those guys who invested in me early on in ministry, and I am so grateful for his influence. And this book was a helpful reminder that we don't have to rush into the future, and that there are times where we have to kind of slow down and let the process transform us. And so he's using the story of Joseph in the Bible, and how Joseph's dreams when he was a young man they didn't come into fruition for decades. And he had to learn to trust the Lord and walk in wisdom and personally be transformed to be able to step into that destiny. And so where he was just an arrogant young man one day and his brothers hated him, Joseph became the second most powerful person in the world as he learned to trust God. But the process was difficult and it was hard. But the big question here with Portman's text is, can we learn to trust the Lord in that long drawn out process and let him shape us and transform us along the way? And I really enjoyed this. It's a quick, the irony is it's a quick paced book talking about slow motion growth. So good on you, Jeffrey. So check it out. It's a good text. So let's talk a little bit about the fiction that I read this last month, and most of these were audiobooks. No, 2 of them were audiobooks and 1 was an ebook. So the first one is Translation State by Leckie, and this book is set in her universe that she's made. I can never pronounce it, but the Ancillary Justice, Mercy, and Sword series. This is in that universe, but you don't have to read those to read this, but it would be helpful. And this is essentially a book about identity, and it's a love story and identity story, and it is part of the Hugo nominees this year for Best Novel. So that's one of the reasons why I read it. And it was interesting. There were times where I was very confused what was happening, and it might have been better to read this in print or digital, and not necessarily as an audiobook. I kind of had a hard time following, and there were times where I had to back up and listen again, like what has happened. But yeah, it is of the Hugo winners or nominees that I've read so far. This is one of my favorites, and I think this has a chance to win. I think it could win. So the next one, another Hugo nominee, is Witch King by Martha Wells, and this is a fantasy story. Hugo nominee for Best Novel. It's a fantasy story about a supernatural being who kind of like a god type who is trapped and is liberated, and the story is told in two different time periods, and as the story progresses, the time periods kind of connect to one another. The challenge with me for this book was I had a hard time caring about the people, and so I finished it, and at the end I was like, oh, okay, that's done. But it was difficult. It was kind of hard for me to follow, and so I don't know if this was the best reading experience. It was an audiobook, and that might have also affected that. Maybe reading it in print, I could have tracked a little easier. I don't know. The last book that I'm going to talk about today is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. And this is a cute little love story about a young man who wants to prove his love to a girl in his small town. And he's going to prove his love by capturing the fallen star that they saw together. So he goes on a quest to try and bring back the star for her. And on the way, he meets all kinds of interesting people, has different adventures and challenges. And by the time he gets back, his life has changed, his expectations have changed, and his idea of love has changed. And so, Gaiman is one of those authors that you just read and you're just like, this is just so warm and cozy, and I love it. So this was one of his like warm, cozy books, but it wasn't it wasn't as predictable as you might think. Like, oh, a cute little love story. No, it has some twists and turns. It has some challenges. It has some questions that we have to ask ourselves. And so those are the books that I read in April of 2024, and I'd love to hear about what you read. If you find this interesting, then please like and subscribe, and share this video. Go ahead, do that. Comment below. If any of these books sounded interesting, like I said, I will include some affiliate links in there, and you can follow those links to the different places. So thanks for watching, and happy reading.